Hey everyone, and welcome to Granny Squares for Lefties. I'm MJ from the Amarillo Public Library, and today I'll teach you how to make a simple granny square if you're left-handed. So what do you need to make a granny square? Actually, all you need is yarn and a crochet hook, but there's some accessories that might come in handy. You might notice I'm wearing compression gloves. Crocheting for a long time can cause some finger and wrist pain, so I like to wear these every time I do it. You'll also need some scissors and an embroidery or yarn needle. And the only real rule of thumb is whatever weight of yarn and size of hook you start with, keep using it throughout your whole project, especially if you're making multiple squares, because this square and this square are made the exact same way with the exact same number of rounds, but this one had a smaller hook, so it's a smaller square. And that's it. That's all you need. Let's start with the basics. How do you begin a granny square? There are two ways to make the center ring, and I'll show you both, but we'll be working with a magic circle. The first way is to create your slip stitch and then a chain of 4 or 5. I'm going to do 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to turn this into a circle by going back to our first stitch, slip stitching into it, and then opening the center. Now the reason why I don't like this method is it can be kind of hard to find exactly the center that we need to crochet into, and our first stitch from our first slip stitch comes loose easily. So you want to look for what looks like a pretzel kind of, and find that bottom triangle. That's what we'll crochet into. And I'll just show you real quick before we move on to the magic ring. Go in, around, and double crochet. So this way is perfectly valid. It's fine. I don't like it. So let's undo that and do it my preferred way. There are a lot of different ways to make a magic circle. The way I like to do it is to lay the tail of the yarn over my hand like this, wrap around my 2 fingers to make an X, pinch that with my pinky, come back over here. Now on this X, we have the bottom one and then the top one. So we're going to go under the bottom one, over the top one, pull it through and flip. Then I kind of move that around to the back. And this is our working yarn. I'm going to make 1 stitch to secure it, and then I can let go. So this is our circle of our magic ring. This is the tail. We can easily tighten, loosen it however we need to. So to start the actual granny square, we need to make double crochets. How do you make a double crochet? To start, chain 2. 1, 2. Some patterns will tell you to chain 3. I find it's a little loose looking. 2 works just fine. So we've chained 2 and we need to do our next double crochet. So if you look, there's a little V between your first 2 fingers. Go into that V, hook the yarn, and then that's a yarn over. So we're going to yarn over and then go into our circle, which I'm just holding open here. Go in, around, and pull a loop through. Now a double crochet is, like it sounds, 2 crochets. So we start with 3 loops on our hook, and we're going to go through 2 of those loops at a time. So in through the V of our fingers, pull it through, 2. Then in again, pull it through, 2. And that is our first double crochet, which makes the middle of our first little cluster. Then 1 more. All right, so granny squares are always done in clusters of 3 double crochets. If you think about the shape of a square, it's 4 sides and 4 corners. So our center is going to have 4 clusters of 3. And in between each cluster, to make those corners, we do a chain of 2. So chain 1 and chain 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and tighten up my ring just a little. And if you'll see, my tail is coming in the direction that I'm crocheting. That's going to help us later when we need to weave that end in. So let's start our second cluster. Go in, yarn over, pull a loop through. We have again 3, pull through 2, pull through 2. That's 1. Okay, once we have our second cluster done, you can kind of see how the square is going to take shape. This is 2 sides and 1 corner. I'm going to finish the last 2 clusters the same way we did these. Okay, once we have our 4 clusters done, let's tighten up that center by pulling on the tail, like that. And now it's time to attach it. So, I will show you 2 different methods for making granny squares, either using one long continuous skein of yarn or doing stripes. So for each round we would use a different set of yarn. We'll start with the long continuous, and it's really easy. So we just need to make our last corner. So let's chain 2. And then to connect it, find the top stitch in that very first cluster. So that's actually the chain 2 we did. And you want the one that's connected to the double crochet next to it. Go under the V at the top of that stitch, pull your working yarn through, and then just pull that loop through, and that's a slip stitch. So now our square is one solid piece. And to work on the next round, I always prefer to start in the corner. So to work our way over to the corner, let's do 2 more slip stitches. So under the V, pull through a loop, under the V, pull through a loop. Okay, so in this corner we're going to build up and work around to do the next round of double crochet clusters. So chain 2, and then 2 double crochets to finish the first cluster. So yarn over and then into this chain space. So it's the great thing about granny squares, aside from these slip stitches we just did, you're never actually crocheting into a stitch, just into a space. And that's a lot easier. So into the space, pull the yarn up and through till we have our 3 little loops again. Pull through 2, pull through 2. 1 more. All right. So when we're working in these corner spaces, we're always doing the exact same thing. 2 clusters of 3 separated by a chain of 2. Our first corner's done, and now to move into the next corner, we don't have to do any other chains. We just need to yarn over and go straight into the new corner space. So pull it up, pull through 2, pull through 2, and that's the start of the first cluster of this next corner. So let's finish the corner off. And that's 2 corners done, 2 left to go. And it's the same thing. Each corner, 2 clusters of 3 with 2 chains in the middle. This gets very repetitive, but actually that's why I like it. It's very calming and soothing, and it's kind of hard to mess up. So let's yarn over, next corner space, start the next cluster. Okay, now we'll do our last corner and I'll show you again how to connect them and move on to the next round. All right, our last corner is complete. So again, we need to connect these 2 stitches together and then work our way over to this corner. So slip stitch into this first one, go under both arms of the V, pull that yarn through, and then pull that loop through the first one. 1 slip stitch, 2 slip stitch, and this 3rd slip stitch can be kind of hard because it's moving straight into the chain. So if you need to angle it and then kind of use the pointy part of your crochet hook to get in there, pull through a loop, and then pull through the slip stitch. All right. For our next round, we do have something slightly different. So if you look, we still have 2 clusters in each corner, but we have a new space on the side where those 2 clusters meet. We're not only going to be crocheting into our corners, but also into this middle space. So we'll start our corner. Chain 1, chain 2, 1 double crochet, 2 double crochet, chain 1, chain 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is where it's a little different. Once again, we're not going to create a chain or do anything different. We're just going to go straight into this next space, but we're only doing 1 cluster of 3 double crochets. So yarn over into the space, do 1, 2, and 3. So that creates our first little side cluster. Now we're moving into the next corner, same thing. That round is completed and it's time to attach it again. And you can see now how the square is growing because we've added 2 in each corner, 1 on each side. So we went from 4 clusters to 8 clusters to now 12 clusters. But we're going to attach it the exact same way by slip stitching in right here. Now for each row, or for each round that we move up, you see we're going to gain a side space. So we started with 1 side space and now we have 2. But it's all the same stitch. So I'm going to quickly go and finish 2 more so that we have a standard 5 round granny square. Because right now we have 1, 2, 3 rounds. And I'll go and finish the last 2 and then show you how to do a neat invisible finish. We are back and I've just completed round 5 of our granny square and it's time to finish it off. But we're doing it a little bit differently because we're not going to continue on to a 6th round. So we're going to do what's called the invisible finish, which just makes it look like there's one long continuous line of stitches around the edge instead of having an obvious bump with a knot. So instead of slip stitching into this cluster, we're going to go ahead and cut our yarn, leaving about 5 inches. We want plenty of room to be able to weave in those ends. Go ahead and snip it. And then we're going to pull that yarn through all the way. So what we're doing is essentially creating a fake stitch that's going to connect these 2 points. And this is where we need our little needle. So to thread the yarn needle, I like to kind of fold it over the top and then pinch it and then just kind of wiggle it down until you've got enough that you can pull through. All right. To create the actual invisible stitch, instead of going into this stitch, which is where we would do our slip stitch normally, we're going to move into the next one because we're creating an additional stitch. And if we go into this one, we'll have 1 extra. So from the front to the back, we're going to go under both arms of the V and pull it through. And then just tighten it a little bit. And now we need to come back through the stitch that our working yarn is coming out of. We're going to go back into it in between the arms of the V from the front to the back, like so. Now if we pull that tight, it looks like we have a regular stitch here. So to tie it off, I'm going to flip this over so we can see the back. I like to go in to these are 2 different clusters right here. Here's our space. I like to go in and kind of attach them. So I'm going to weave through one and the other because that invisible stitch can be kind of loose. So don't pull it too tight. And now to weave it off, we're going to go down through one of these double crochets till we get to that corner with all of these loops on it. And then go underneath those loops. So let's go ahead and weave all the way over to the other side. And again, being sure not to pull too tightly. Under all the loops, out the other side. And now we're going to go back, but we're going to skip this first loop so that it has something to hold on to and go back the other direction. If you want it to be extra secure, do that one more time. Skip a loop, go back under, and now we can trim this. And our last step is to weave in our beginning tail. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten it and thread the needle. Okay, so look for the direction that this yarn is coming out. So it's coming out of right here going this way. So carry it on in the same direction a little bit more. And then just like we did before, we're going to go backwards, skipping a loop. And then one more time, just to be sure, skip a loop, pull through a few. And now we can trim that, turn it over, and that is a completed granny square. Next, I will show you the techniques that you would need to use if instead of using one long bit of yarn, you separate it so that each of these rounds uses a different piece of yarn. Now our first granny square, we used one long continuous piece of yarn because the yarn I had was self-striping. So it has long sections of colors so that as it goes on, the new rounds have different colors. But say your yarn doesn't have that, or you have a bunch of different ones you want to use, how do we make our little stripy rounds? So I've already completed the very first one, the exact same way as we did before. And I'll show you how to start with a new piece of yarn and then how to finish it off before we start the next one. Because here we don't have to do a fancy little invisible stitch. We can just tie a knot, which you can kind of see right here, makes a little bump, but because a new round will be on top of it, you can't see it anyway, so it doesn't have to be perfect. So to get started, we just need our new yarn and wherever we're starting. There are a few different ways to do this. The way I'm going to show you is my preferred way because it doesn't create any knots, so that if something terrible happens, you can undo the whole thing super easily. So we'll start by pulling the new yarn through, leaving a good tail. Okay, and then we want to create one stitch to kind of secure it. So we're going to pull the tail up with our working yarn, like so, and then pull both of those through the loop. So catch both of them, pull through the loop, and now we can drop the tail and kind of tighten it a little bit and continue on. Super easy. So we're starting a new corner the exact same way we started before, with a chain of 2. The first chain might be a little awkward because we have 2 loops here instead of 1 like normal, but just carefully pull it through both of those. There's 1 chain and 2 chain. So now we're starting in a corner, so what do we need? We need 2 clusters of 3 separated by a chain of 2. So there's 1, 2, 3, chain 2, and 1, 2, 3. So since the majority of this is done the exact same way as we did before, I'm going to go ahead and come back when I have the rest of the clusters or the rest of the corners done. Okay. Finishing off your round this way is actually a lot simpler than that invisible stitch we did when we're finishing the complete granny square, because all you need to do is do 1 slip stitch as if we were going to move over into the next round. Do 1 and then chain 1. And now we're going to cut it. So I'm going to leave some space, snip it, pull it through, and then pull it tight. So there is a little lump here where the knot is, but once we do our next round with a new piece of yarn, you won't be able to tell. And when we're weaving in these two ends, we can actually bring this one down to meet this one, which is not knotted on in any way, and kind of knot them together, and then hide the tail ends under this piece. And that is how you would create a granny square using different bits of yarn for each round. And that's the end. There are almost endless possibilities for using granny squares. So now that you have this skill, there are so many fun things you can make. Thank you so much for joining me, and be sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you can get more videos from us here at the Amarillo Public Library. Have fun crocheting!